Today is Sunday. It's Pesach Sheni. Nitokim Verfallen. You know that JLI sends out these films, little clips. JLI is the educational arm of Americas. They teach people, and they do very beautiful work. I mean, it's not my style. It's not exactly Chabad mit heading mit Bramfen. It's very American, very marketed, but it's just so real. And so they gave one out. I get one for my brothers every Friday. They give out the weekly JLI, but they gave one out for today for Pesach Sheni. Garnish to pay in the Nitokim Verfallen. Nitokim Verfallen is a word that the Friedrich Rebbe said. Right? It's a Hayem Yem. Today's Hayem Yem. It says that the Rav and Pesach Sheni es came on the Nitokim Verfallen. We can all if you were far away. Und says lachem mit pintalach. Rot lachem mit pintalach means you're far away by your own choice. The lesson of Pesach Sheni is as it came when it came for found. And the Rebbe, so the Friedrich Rebbe said it one time. I think it's a letter, or wherever it comes from. And the Rebbe made from this a whole new Yiddishkeit. The Nitokim Verfallen. We live in the age of the Nitokim Verfallen. Nitokim Verfallen or Nitokim Verfallen. I think that's it's a byproduct. If there's Nitokim Verfallen, there's no such thing as it's too late. There's no such thing as someone for whom it's too late. We can alam on the second day. And this is the hera of our generation. And if I may add, from the Rebbe's perspective, the shoirish of this piskom from the Friedrich Rebbe. And like I said, the Friedrich Rebbe said it once, the Rebbe said it 1,000 times. Yeah? So whose word is it? Is it the Rebbe's or the Friedrich Rebbe's? You know? I'm going to ask you a question. Who made the takon of chitas? The Rebbe or the Friedrich Rebbe? The Friedrich Rebbe made the takon of chitas. He put it into the Hayem Yem. How many times did Friedrich Rebbe talk about chitas? Every person went into Yechidus. For his birthday, the Rebbe said the first day was chitas. And if he didn't say chitas, he said, okay, start saying chitas now. He came back the next year, he asked you again, you're saying chitas. If the answer was yes, then the Rebbe moved on to another Eirah. And if the answer was no, he said, okay, at least from now. Chitas. So it's Eirah for the Friedrich Rebbe, the Rebbe. And Al Derech said, the Nitokim Verfallen, the Friedrich Rebbe wrote and said, maybe it comes from the earlier Rebbe, ich weiß nicht, ich denke nicht auf den Moment. But the Rebbe said, Nitokim Verfallen so many times, and in so many different ways. You know, in the later Sichas, the Rebbe focused on the Lo Manigora. Besides for the Nitokim Verfallen, there's the Tanya, Lo Manigora. Why should we lose out? In Tafshin Nun Aleph, 27 years ago, the Rebbe spoke Lo Manigora. Why should we lose out on the Gula Amitas Vashlema? In other words, there is the answer you can always fix, and there's the Tanya, why should I lose? And I'm going to mention something to you which I heard over Shabbos from my brother-in-law. I'm into this, okay? This is entirely consistent with my own education. The Rebbe spoke Chav Ches Nissen 27 years ago. Zach Shana, yeah? Drei, 27 years ago, the Rebbe spoke to Sikha about Mashiach's coming. And with Avtana alles was meant to bring a Mashiach, yeah? We all remember that Sikha. Now we call that Sikha the Sikha of Chav Ches Nissen. The reason we call the Sikha of Keach Nissen is because the Rebbe said it after Ma'ariv on a Thursday night to Friday. Chav Ches Nissen was Friday. But in the Sikha, the Rebbe didn't say Chav Ches, he kept saying Chav Zayin. But he didn't say Chav Zayin Nissen, he said Chav Zayin Lo Yimir. He must have said it 6 or 7 times, maybe 8 more. They understood from the Rebbe that the Rebbe told them to take out the word Lo Yimir. If you listen to the tape, see Chav Zayin, pause, Chav Zayin, they took out the word Lo Yimir. Kayachol, the Rebbe made a mistake, Chav Zayin, yeah. Friday was Chav Zayin Lo Yimir. This past Friday was Lo Yimir. And North and South Korea met. Oh. And I'm not a cosmopolitan, you understand? I don't keep track. Politics bores me. I'm going to waste my time, I'll study science rather than politics. Because politics is a game of, it's bluff and sheket. But politics is at the same time, it's pekuach nefesh. Politics is not a few people sitting in a room making jokes and congratulating each other. Decisions politicians make affect people's lives. It's a deadly game. But it's a game of sheker. And the people who follow the news have been telling me for the last 2-3 months that, what the Rebbe said in the early 80s, the Welt Reisetzach, North Korea was this close to nuclear war. because we have a Meshuggah president, nicht kasechel, et nicht gelernt in college, und es nicht a sehr klug that he can nuance and tweak and come up with a haskalah. How you can be nice to the North Koreans enough that they'll stop being tyrants. So he threatened him, this guy. Trump threatened North Korea, and on Friday, North and South Korea met. So my brother-in-law said to me, it's such a Mashiach-dik event. I mean, how these things play out, we don't know. You know, the Rebbe said Mashiach's coming, but he didn't tell us how. So we're all guessing and figuring about Ayadot. But this is such an unbelievable turn of events. 2 months ago, they were saying that we're in a very, very terrible Maimed Amatzir. And my brother-in-law told me, and again, you know, if I didn't hear it on the radio or read it in the newspaper, wonder why I believe it when I hear it in mikveh. I didn't hear it in mikveh. I heard it by a kiddush. This Ken Zaynemis. But this, how this is going to play out, but the idea that North and South Korea met, I don't know if you remember how East Germany and West Germany became one country. Overnight. The worst of the Eastern Bloc, the worst communist, was East Germany. They're the same people. It could have happened that in a week, North Korea and South Korea become one country. It's mamish. In the Meibishten's Welt can alles treffen. But 27 years ago, the Rebbe made a mistake, you understand? Instead of saying Chov Zayin Nissen, he said Chov Zayin Loimen. And this is this in my world of Hergish. This works. You know, everybody has their own world of Hergish. There's a lot of things that people take seriously that I say. Do me a favor. Don't sell me no luxury. But this is the Rebbe's words. You know, von a Wort von Friedrich and Rebbe, which is so. I heard it from Rebbe Weinberg. When Yossi Weinberg hat das gesagt, Yad Hashem Ateva Olav with his whole heart. Dass given a Yid was geheißen aber Avraham Parish. Avraham Parish was a moiridik Makusha. He was a big chassid and a very big Makusha. And he lived here in America, and his family was in Israel in the middle of the war. And he gets a letter from his daughter that she's seeing a bocher by the name of Ephraim Wolf, Rebbe Ephraim Wolf, Rabbi Ephraim Wolf. So he goes into the Friedrich of the Yechidus, and he tells the Rebbe that his daughter sent him a message. So the Friedrich got very excited and told him moirin de kamailas about Rebbe Ephraim Wolf. It was a Ernste bocher, an Ehrliche bocher, a Frumme bocher, a Chassidische bocher. Rebbe Ephraim Wolf was one of the most important shluchim of the Rebbe in Eretz Yisrael for the last, now it's already 75 years, he's passed away. He held all the Tevach Pimims. It's nit pashut. Ephraim Wolf was a big chassid and an incredible askin. He really was a very important Lubavitcher. You know, he's in the class of the most important Lubavitcher chassid of our generation. He's in that category. There's nothing to question about it. Anyway, he gets a letter a couple of weeks later that it's off. So he felt terrible. Of course, he felt terrible that the shidduch wasn't going to work. But that means that the Friedrich Rebbe was wrong. Now that's it's like saying the Eibishter made a mistake. A year passes, and he gets a letter from his daughter that he's meeting Ephraim Wolf. So now, more than he was excited about the fact that his daughter was getting married, the Rebbe wasn't wrong. He said, I rang a lot from some Rebbe. He ran into the Friedrich Rebbe, and this time he didn't run in exactly the way I'm describing it. And he said, the Rebbe was right. The Rebbe was right. So the Friedrich Rebbe says to him, from the Rebbe you'd never hear such atheists. Rebbe Avraham, meine Ravor geht nicht verfallen. Nicht lemailo, nicht lemata. Und da haben sagen mit Adogosh. Nicht mit Arof. Rabbi Avraham, a word that I say is never wasted. Not on high and not here on this earth. And when you say it, you have to say it with emphasis. And not with weakness, not with sheepishness, not with uncertainty. Verstehst? So the Rebbe Kwayochel made a mistake. And he didn't do it once. I don't know how many, every single time the Rebbe said Chav Zayin, he said Loimet. So, okay, Lamir Zen, Lamir Den Leben, the Gola Mitzvah Shleima. The Rebbe had Chutz Geffen the Hats for one more minute of Golas, and it's 27 years since those Sikhs. And by the way, Taka today, Pesach Sheni, I'm reminding you that Tovshin Nunav, what's in Kviyas says this year. The Rebbe spoke a Sikha today, 27 years ago, and the Teichan of the Sikha was Lama Nigora. Lama Nigora. Lama Nigora means, why should we miss out on the Gula Mitzvah Shleima? That's what the Rebbe spoke then. But, and tomorrow, Tezvav Iyar, was on Monday, and the Rebbe went to the oil. The Rebbe came back from the oil, and he gave out the Dvar Malchus. The Dvar Malchus is Sichas of the Rebbe and Rambam HaMashiach. The most important Sichas. The Dvar Malchus has very difficult Sichas. Very hard, not easy sichas. But they teach you how the Rebbe teaches you, how the Rambam teaches you, which means how Allah teaches you, what Mashiach is. And the Rebbe gave it out, and of course the story was that the Rebbe came out of his room holding the kuntres, and he set a label, which is Oistel Azoy, just the way you see it here. V'Amalchus was a weekly publication that came out in Israel through a young man named Pelis. He's sending all the shuls Teda, and the Rebbe said, we're giving out this at the Zeviya Shtedengate. The Divan Malchus that we got, if you look on top, it says Kuntres Yud Beis. It's the 12 pamphlets, because he used to give out every week. He had just started this new mitzvah of being Mefarsim the Rebbe's Teda in the shul. The green Dvar Malchus, or the blue Dvar Malchus, which the Rebbe gave us, and there's a famous picture of the Rebbe walking out of shul, holding it under his arm, was Kuntres Yud Beis. That's a little detail that no one is Mesim Lev. It was, in other words, it wasn't the pshat that it was specific. Someone gave out a series of sichos on a weekly basis. And when the Rebbe spoke at the Inyan von Chavches Nissen and then Tazrim Etzera about Evi Derech Yishara Shaval Yadam Kol Shei Teferes Shabbat Malchus, that you have to learn about Mashiach, learn the Yonah Mashiach Gula. So the next week he gave out this kuntres, and the Rebbe said we're giving this out just the way it looks, the same size, big. Okay, so I want to get back to my original point, which is Pesach Sheni, and the Token Farfal. The Token Farfal, the root of it is I'm just giving you Oisius, Ahavas Yisrael Pashut. To say that there's no such thing as too late means there's no such thing as a lost Jew. And I don't only mean there's no such thing as a lost Jew because he's a never hatinik shenishu ben umis. He doesn't know. You can have a troublemaker and an agitator and an antinik. He was born misolto mishamna. You could be, disenfranchisement in the world in general and among Jews in particular is not a new phenomenon. It's not an infrequent phenomenon. We're called Am Kshayeref and hard-necked people for a reason. And that hard-necked is the best of what the Jewish people are, and the hard-necked is what the worst of the Jewish people are. And there have been occasions when the Rachmana Litzlan, Gedeli Yisrael, made a decision to take a knife and do a surgery. To cut out a Jew. To cut out. It's true. It's happened in the past where the Gedeli Yisrael made a conscious decision to disinclude. And the Rebbe says, Netoken Farfal. Netoken Farfal obviously has to mean Netoken Farfal Ne. This is a whole new level of V'ahavta l'recha kamoich. And it creates a whole new hashkafa of how you look at a Jew. Not just a Jew who's not from, but a Jew who's dedicated to undermining you. Netoken Farfal, Netoken Farfal. Anyway, so we did Pesach Sheni, yeah? Mit adogosh or nish mit arofa, yeah? Netoken Farfal. Let's learn Tanya. Now, what's happening in our Tanya classes, for those who don't remember, is we're doing what is called, culturally, spinning our wheels. We haven't learned the word of Tanya in about 6 classes. Not 6 weeks, but 10 weeks, because we have Pesach in the middle. It's been a while since we learned Tanya inside. And the reason is because I explained to you Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, but Hashem's help, to whatever extent I'm able to. I explained to you Netzach, Hayid, and Yesod. And the last couple of classes talked about Malchus. I explained to you all the midas in the Nefesh Adam. The reason I did this is because in the Tanya Peidah Gimel, the Alter Rebbe doesn't explain them specifically. He just includes them in his discussions on Chochmah Bina Vadas. So I told you that I'm going to insert into the Tanya Peidah Gimel what's not here. And the first place where this idea is developed is in the Tanya itself, in the Igeres HaKedesh. And there's letters in the Tanya. And the 15th Igeres HaKedesh, Tesvav, Lahav, and Mashal, Umlitz, Divrei Chacham V'Chidesam, is a letter from the Alter Rebbe where he explains the 7 midas. And first he explains the 7 midas. And after he explains the 7 midas, he goes back to explain Chochmah Bina Vadas. So we've done this. But there's another thing that I want to share, which is not in Igeres HaKedesh. This already you have to look to the Maimonim of the Rebbe Rabbi. And there's a story, and I think the story applies to this inyan. In the Maimonim of the Rebbe Rashab, you have the sugya of chush. And I don't know if it goes. It's not made earlier. You have the Tafish Tamach Beis. Chush. Chush means the senses. In Chassidus, when we talk about the neshama, we talk about a number of different parts or categories of the neshama. One part of the neshama is called Gilui HaNefesh. Gilui HaNefesh means when the infinity of the soul speaks directly. Gilui HaNefesh means the ganze bli gvul red. The whole infinity of the neshama speaks. That's touch Gilui HaNefesh. Mesiris Nefesh is Gilead Nefesh. Tshuva is Gilead Nefesh. Kabbalah Seil is Gilead Nefesh. Simcha is Gilead Nefesh. And in language of Chassidus, Gilead Nefesh is called the Ratzon and Einig. In addition to Gilead Nefesh, there's something called Koyach HaNefesh. Koyach means an energy, Koyach means a potential, but most importantly, Koyach means a tool. A tool means that when you speak what the neshama has to say, you don't speak what the neshama has to say directly. You speak what the neshama has to say indirectly. I want to tell you what I feel in my neshama, and I give you a logical explanation. So if I give you a logical explanation of something that I feel in my neshama, seichel limits how much I can say what I understand, because it's really coming from more. That's such a koyach, a tool. And we have koyach, tools of the nefesh, that we use to speak what the nefesh has to say. As I explained it to you many times, if you express your infinity, and I express my infinity, and she express her infinity, there's no room in the world for more than one person. Because every person's believable cancels everybody else's believable. He put us in a goof, so you're in your space and I'm in my space. And he gave us koyches. Koyches means tools through which we can communicate in such a way that allow us to share the same space. We can even disagree. We can even disagree and coexist. Why? Because I don't say it, but I take it for atzmi. I say it in a rational way. Even though my mind is representing my infinity, but I allow my mind to filter my infinity so that I can communicate with you, and you communicate with me. It's called koyches. Now, in koyches there are two levels, two kinds of tools. The higher level of koyches is called seichel, the intelligence, which is the curiosity and the inquisitiveness and the desire to know what is unknown, and then the power of intuition, and then analysis and thoroughness, and so on and so forth. The koyach haseichel allows me to get something which is beyond me and bring it to myself. And then we have koyach of regish, koyach of the midas, which is the emotions. The emotions mean that information that I gather from outside myself, in whatever way I gather it, I personalize it. I make it mine. Right? In Torah and Chassidus, when they talk about your seichel, they use the pasuk, Kirvas Elokim Teiv, being close to the Eibishter is good. And when they speak about the koyches that are called the midas, they say Kirvas Elokim Li Teiv. Closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is good for me. The first is objective, and the other is subjective. Which is better? And the answer is Shneim Ka'achas Teivim. You need both. You need a clear mind and an applied heart. The combination makes it a shtickle mensch. This is called koyches. So the first category is called Gilui HaNefesh. The second category is called Koyches HaNefesh. And we did all the 10 koyches. We spent a lot of time. We still have to do das. When we get to the time, we'll do das mitzvah Hashem. And then there's the third category, which is B'chalal not mentioned in Tanya. I mean, I remember as a kid, my mashpiyah used to say that there's a remes for it someplace. I even forgot where the mashpiyah told me the remes is. It's called chush. Chush means the senses. We have 5 senses: seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. They're a whole different system. The chushim are a completely different thing than the koyches. You use your brain and your heart. The tools of the mind and the heart serve one type of purpose, and they're assisting. They're a hishtalshalus within a person that has one type of order. Is a totally different type of order, and I guess you could say on some level it's a totally different kind of personality that's to do with chushim, the 5 senses. And again, in Tanya there's no allusion to the chushim, but in the Maimorim, in the later Rabbi, I don't know. I mean, the story that I was going to tell you was that the Friedrich Rebbe had a shver. Everybody has a shver. The shver had geheißen harav hakodesh Rabbi Avraham Shneis. This is the Chamadina's father. If the Friedrich Rebbe calls him Kaddish, you can be assured that he was also tzaddik. Because Kaddish is higher than tzaddik. Which means that he was in some tzaddik sanenikol haroyel. Rabbi Avraham Shneis was the Friedrich Rebbe's father-in-law. And there was a big kid of Alavavas. They were very close. He was by our Rebbe's chasanim. People don't know this, but Harav HaKodesh, Rabbi Avraham Shneerson, was by the Rebbe's wedding. He came together with Abba. In other words, Rebbe's Chamadina's parents were both at the Rebbe's chasanim in Varsha. They died before the war, as far as I know. You know, the Rebbe's Chamadina had a sister and a brother. The Rebbe's Chamadina there was a Harav Ben Zion Shneerson. He used to come here. He was the Rebbe's uncle. And when he came, he sat by the table. He sat next to the Rebbe by the table. Nishmamish next to him. He was Rashag, so he was the Rebbe's Chamadina's brother. He was an uncle to the Rebbetzin and to the sisters. Anyway, they're not against Rebbe Ramshner's. And the Friedrich, but you have to understand, this was Nezhin, right? It was Chabad, but it was Nezhin. Nezhin, there were 4 Chabads. Between the Tzemach Tzedek's Istalkus and World War I, Chabad was split into 4. There was Lubavitch, and there was Kapust, and there was Liadi, and there was Nezhin. Nezhin, the Psalm Nezhin, it was in Tzemach Tzedek's Azur, there was a brother, the Rebbe Marash. There's a Gewaldike Maise, with Rebbe Solnech. And I'm telling the story because it's a nice story. The Rebbe Rashab had sons. The Rebbe Marash had sons to marry off. The Shidduchim that the sons were made when the Tzaddik was still alive. So it said in the Tnoim, they made Tnoim, not like we do. They made Tnoim when they made the Shidduch. We don't do that for all kinds of good reasons. That the Chasna is going to be in Lubavitch or Yerushalayim. By the time the kids got married, the Tzaddik was gone. So the Mechutanim said the Chassid was going to be in Lubavitch because the Tzemach Tzedek is in Lubavitch. But the Tzemach Tzedek is not in Lubavitch, so the Tzemach Tzedek has to be where they live. And the Rebbe Marash was really, really not happy about it. I mean, you know how unhappy he was? The Rebbe Rashab's Chasna did not happen in Lubavitch, and the Rebbe Marash did not go to the Chasna. The Marash stayed in the Chasna, he made a Chasna in Lubavitch, and when the Rebbe Rashab came back from his physical Chasna, the Rebbe Marash told him, Agris von Taten. Agris, guards in Tzemach Tzedek. The older son, the Razor, married Rebbe Solnech's daughter. In other words, the Razor, the Rebbe Rashab's brother, was a brother-in-law to the Rebbe Ramshner, and to the Friedrich Rebbe Shver. So when it came to the engagement and to the Chasana, the Rebbe Marash says the Chasana is in Lubavitch, and Solnech says no, the Chasana is in Nezhin. You're talking about 2 brothers, tzaddikim, groise nishomes. But, big people can be very stubborn. So they had a dintera. And the Rebbe Maharash lost the dintera. They went to Rabbanim. And the Rabbanim paskin that the mokem of the Chasana is where the Kala lives. And that the B'Salmeach is right, the Chasana should be in Yeshua. So after the dintera, and the B'Salmeach won, the B'Salmeach said, okay, now we're going to make the Chasana in Lubavitch. Now I don't know exactly the Ishtalshalus. I wasn't there. What the B'Salmeach gave him. And I think that you could say that perhaps that's why he was Eiche, that his granddaughter was the Rebbetzin, the Friedrich the Rebbetzin. He was older than the Rebbe Marash. You know how much older he was than the Rebbe Marash? He was born before the Mittel, the Rebbe passed away. The Rebbe Marash was born, he was born before the Alter Rebbe passed away. And the Rebbe Marash was born after the Mittel, the Rebbe passed away. There's close to 20 years between them. Actually, was older. But he apparently at Fashtanin, that indeed, when you talk about such people, years are only one factor. There are other factors. Lepeil the Chas was in Lubavitch. It's a moed de Kamaisa. It's a very beautiful story. Okay. So the Friedrich Rebbe always wanted to impress his father-in-law. He always wanted to impress his father-in-law. So how's he going to impress his father-in-law? He would bring Chassidus from Lubavitch. The Rebbe Rashab would say Chassidus, and the Friedrich Rebbe would come to his Shver and Iberzog and repeat Chassidus for the Rebbe Rashab. And the Friedrich Rebbe, when he said Chassidus, it was, he didn't stutter and mutter and So in Samach Vov, Tov Reish Samach Vov, the Rebbe Rashab, Simchas Torah, Fabrein the whole night. The Hakofas were in the morning. From midnight till 5 in the morning, the Rebbe Rashab said a Maimon Chassidus. 5 hours. The Maimon was said with Hafsokis. The Rebbe stopped and started. But a whole night the Rebbe said Chassidus. It's called Kamti Ani Lefteach L'Dei. It's a Simchas Torah Samach Vov was a very famous Samach Vov. There was also the Maimon Kinah Yisrael V'Yaveyu, which the Rebbe Rashab said in haste without preparing. As he was sitting by Fabringen, he had an Inyan, and he said a Maimon Chassidus unprepared, which was very against the Rebbe Rashab's Hanhoge, because the Rebbe Rashab never did anything without being prepared. Ad Kedei Kach, the Rebbe Rashab was once called up to Maftir when he was away from Lubavitch. Now the Rebbe Rashab knew the Tanakh by heart, I promise you, and he said that Maftir 20 times. And he asked permission from the Kehillah. He went into the other room. He looked over the Maftir. He came back in. But the Rebbe Rashab, not to say something, to say without being prepared. But he said a whole Maimon Chassidus, Kinai Yisrael V'Yaveyu, because there was a big chiddush. In other words, the Maimer came to him as he was sitting by Fabreinu. 50 years later, in Tafshin Tazai, 1955-56, the Rebbe said that Maimer Kinayas also Simchas Teire, Tafshin Tazai, 50 years later. Anyway, that same Simchas Teire, there was also the Kamte Adiyas Teachadei, which was 4 or 5 hours long. It's printed. You can see the Maimer printed. It's in the Teire Shalom and the Siches. And you have a Nachman Rebbe, it's huge. It's huge. It's huge. It's huge. It's 25 pages. And what's unusual about it is, it's a Hanocha from the Friedrich Rebbe. It's a the Friedrich Rebbe, the Rebbe Rashab never wrote the Maimer. Friedrich Rebbe wrote the Maimer. And in the Maimer you have parenthesis, Aleph Hey. Aleph Hey means Omar HaKesef. This is a note. Friedrich Rebbe put his own notes into his father's Maimer. And sometimes you have Aleph Yud Yud, Omar Yosef Yitzchak. The Friedrich Rebbe wrote his father's Maimer. And in the Maimer, in the printed form, you can see it, he put in his own Hagos in parentheses, and he begins each one either Aleph Hey, which means Omar HaKesef, this is the opinion of the writer, which is the Friedrich Rebbe, or Aleph Yud Yud, which is the Friedrich Rebbe's name. Anyway, the Hemshech HaSipur is that when he was next time in Yezhin, or wherever it was, he repeated the Maimer to his father-in-law. He wanted to impress his father-in-law, so he told his father-in-law the Maimer come to a shtickle, 4 or 5 hours of chassidus. Yeah, but Ramshnes and was a keli for something like that. Me and you, after 15 minutes, we have to have a tea and a coffee and a break and a night's sleep, and that's it. So when he came back to Lubavitch, he told his father. So this is the famous story which is printed in the Maimer of Chodedi. So the Rebbe Rashab asked the Friedrich Rebbe, did you remember to insert into the Maimer the moshel that I gave B'derech Hesher? When the Rebbe Rashab said that Maimer, he gave a moshel, an example, an allegory, a parable, an explanation. But he said, B'derech Hesher. And he's saying it without a source. He's saying it on his own. Whenever the Rebbe said something which didn't have a source, he would say, Yesh Leimar, you could say perhaps. And sometimes he would say, Yesh Leimar B'derech Hesher. So the Friedrich Rebbe said, of course. So the Rebbe Rashab's next question was, did you remember to say that I said it B'derech Hesher? To say that I'm saying it uncertainty. So the Friedrich Rebbe says, nope, that I skipped. So the Rebbe Rashab says, you're chazering my Maimer. I said, B'derech Hesher. Why did you take out B'derech Hesher? So the Friedrich Rebbe told his father, Badir, B'derech Hesher is B'amir Avadai. What you're not sure about, I'm certain. There's no question, it's a Maimer. And I heard that what it was that the Rebbe said, B'derech Hesher, was this inyan of Chush. A marshal in Chassidus Chushi. You don't have it a lot in Chassidus, but you have it enough. Instead of talking about the brain and the heart, talk about the eyes and the ears and the nose and the mouth and the fingers. You understand? Chush, senses. So we did all the midas. I want to talk about the chushim now. I'm not going to spend that much time, but I want to talk about chushim, the senses, the 5 senses. The basic idea of the 5 senses are, the closed idea of the 5 senses are that they're, I'm going to use 2 Hebrew words and I'll try to explain both of them. They're makifim on the one hand, and they're atzmim on the other hand. What that means, makifim on one hand, and atzmiyim on the other hand. What that means, in other words, is as follows. The eye see. When the eye sees, there's no need to process. It sees. When the ear hears, it hears. There's no need to process. The brain and the heart are a system that gathers, processes, and gives out based on how the process went. The brain analyzes, questions, and when you see or you hear or you smell or you taste, it comes straight from the world around you, straight into the nefesh. So in a way, the chushim are much more powerful than the keches. The way the eyes work, when you see something, you can philosophize from today till doomsday. You saw with your own eyes. What you saw is absolute. When you hear, and hearing doesn't mean so much ideas. Hear means really hearing melody, music. You hear somebody cry. So you're not hearing something that's intellectual. When you hear ideas, that's part of the koyach system. Or the chushim can hear sounds of different types. And the same is true with smell, the same is true with taste, and the same is true with touch. The way the chushim work it's a much simpler system. Right? Some people call it the right side of the brain versus the left side of the brain. I recently saw an article that this whole thing about right side and left side is the baba maisi. But okay, so the baba is like Meirech Yom Vishonim Zay. Don't bother the baba. I saw in a science journal that they always said the right side of the brain. It's the way the chushim work is you see something and it immediately hits you. An incredible force. There's no process. It doesn't take time. you see an event, whether it's a good event or a not such good event, your reaction is instantaneous. It touches you very profoundly, very deeply, and very instantaneously. All the chushim are like that. All five. When you have a feel, when you touch, we can't do it because we can see. But never, people who don't have the ability to see or hear, their fingers are incredibly sensitized, and they can when they feel something, they can know an enormous amount simply by touch. An enormous amount. The chush hamishush, the sense of touch, which is for most of us very, very dull, because the sense that we use first is our eyes. But people who need to touch have an incredibly sensitive touch. Both. Every chush has the same two rules. Makif means it doesn't go through a process. It doesn't go through a process. There's no hishtalshelus. Makif means it's something which is easy for you to get. And atzmi means it touches you in your very essence. This is true of all the five chushim, which is why we say if you see something, and you saw it incorrectly, for whatever reasons. You didn't see all the facts, you didn't see what happened before. But when you see it, the impact that it has on you makes it almost impossible for you to use your brain and heart processes to correct it based on information that somebody else gives you. Because the power of the five senses is so powerful that it literally it gets you in such a way that you don't forget it, and your version of the reality based on what you saw or heard or smelled or tasted or even touched is so strong that it becomes impossible to alter, almost impossible to. And as I started to say, even touch, when you touch, the information that you gather through touch is not something which you then understand and feel. It goes straight into the nefesh. So the chushim have a very big maila and a very, very big chesed. The maila of the chushim is that it goes straight to the previous of the person. The chesed of the chushim is that you're not processing it, you're not chewing it, you're not dissecting it. So it's, as they say in our culture, it's easy come, easy go. Like the Friedrich Rebbe said, Jiden in Amerika werden sehr schnell abgeheizt. Aber sie killen sich also schnell up. To inspire an American is very easy, but he becomes uninspired just as quickly, like a little kid. You make a speech, he's on fire. 2 minutes later, he's having a coke, and vergessen the ganze Geschäft. In other words, chushim are a different system. They're a separate part of the neshama, and you have ganz and a sugis and chassidus built on chushim. The Kabbalah for the Kabbalists keeping score at home, and of course, I have a room full of Kabbalah. Why not? Yeah, it's called the Havolim. Havolim. What's Hevel? Hevel, Havolim, Hevel, Havolim, Omer, Kels, Hevel, Havolim. The Havolim are the chushim. Hevel means it has no substance. It has no substance. But at the same time, it has life. It has a certain warmth to it, a certain moisture to it. The chushim are called havolim, which means it's another pathway from outside the person to inside the person, or another pathway from inside the person to outside the person. It's very, very direct. It's very, very powerful, but it's very, very temporary. And the rule is that the chushim are in levels. For example, re'iyah is the most spontaneous of the chushim. What you see, the reaction to seeing is stronger than the reaction to hearing. In other words, when you see an event and you listen to a beautiful piece of music, both of those things reach the deepest depths of the neshama. And it says a person can pass out from seeing things, but hearing music, it says, can bring tikalesa nefesh. Music can bring a person's neshama to leave his guf, and in the ear, it doesn't have that ability. Why? Because since the chush hashmiyah, and I'm not talking about hearing a svara, I'm talking about hearing a sound, music, melody, or a cry. The process is longer, so the process is deeper. In other words, even though in general all five chushim share the idea that I mentioned initially, that they go straight into the nefesh, they go straight to your etzah. When you see something, it's transforming. When you hear something, it's transforming. When you smell something, when you taste something, when you touch something, it's transforming. Because it's so quick, it's easy come, easy go. It doesn't have depth. There's no time for you to process it, and to use the lashon that the Rebbe would use so often, the idea that nasis damu basar kibsori, that it becomes proverbially your blood and flesh only happens if you chew it. And you process it, and you break it down, and then recreate it as a part of yourself. In the chushim, it's not that way at all. When you see something, especially whatever you saw, that's what you have. And there's nothing, no process in you to take what you saw and make it your own. So the impact initially is very, very powerful, but it's also very, very temperate. So again, in general, all 5 chushim say this property. And I'll use a cliche, I'll use a pun. This is nida b'chush. You see it vividly. You see it with your chushim. The incredible impact of seeing something and hearing something and smelling something and tasting something and touching something has a great impact. You know, a person who had a certain smell, and he associates that smell with a very happy event, like he smelled it by a wedding. Or lahavl, a person had a certain experience, an olfactory event. Yeah, he smelled something, and it was associated with a tragedy or with fear. He sees it even by animals. Every time he encounters that smell, he's there again. And if it was a happy event, it raises his spirit. And if it was a frightful event, he's afraid again. Even animals, because this is how powerful the senses are. They're a completely different system. There's no time, there's no processing. There's no taking in and thinking it over and deciding what you saw. It's not a koyach, it's a chush. So the chushim are very superficial, and the chushim are also very, very, very deep. And it's part of the shleimus of a person. A person is whole because he has koyach and chushim. And by the way, just to complete what I started before, there's Giloyei HaNefesh, there's Keches HaNefesh, there's Chusya HaNefesh, and the 4th category is called Levusha HaNefesh, the garments of the soul. Levusha HaNefesh, we're going to learn the next Pedic. In Pedic Dal, Machshava Dibur U'Maisa, which means the garments of communication between the person and the world around themselves. Thought, speech, and action. So this is the topic that we want to discuss. We want to discuss the Chushim. But understand that when we talk about Chushim, we're talking about the Rebbe. Yeah, a person sees something in Hashem's world, and he sees the Eibishter in it. Whether he sees it because it's a Hashgacha Pratis, or he sees it because he has Seich. You look at a leaf. Look at a leaf. If you look the way you're supposed to look at a leaf, you see that whoever made this put so much thought into this. And when you multiply that times billions and trillions of leaves, and thousands and thousands of different forms and different creations, it's overwhelming. This is called seeing the Eibishter in Gashmis. It's called Riyas Alakus B'Muchash. It's not seeing Hashem intellectually, which is called a Riyas Sichlis, an intellectual vision, which is a lower Madregas. This is called a vivid vision. It says in Chassidus that when you see the Eibishter B'Gashmis, vividly it reaches the Yechidah. When you see the Eibishter intellectually, it reaches only Chayim. And there's an idea that you look at the physical world and you see Hashem. Now for this you need a certain feel, or need a chush. Look at a leaf, you don't see a leaf, you say the artist who made this leaf. But if you have that chush, the entire physical world is your evidence of the presence of the creator of the world. Wherever you look, you see the Eibishter. It's an incredibly powerful experience. But like I said before, the impact is isegeveinlich. But we all know, we all understand that in Yiddishkeit and in Chassidus, we have a very bad word. It's a terrible, terrible word. It's 4 letters. 4-letter words are not supposed to be said in a public place or in a private place. In English it's 4 letters, and in Hebrew it's also 4 letters if you play with it. W-O-R-K, work. In Hebrew it's Ayin Beis Dalad Hey, Avoido. Avoido. We were educated, and we were reared, and we were trained, and we were inspired, and we were taught that what's real you work for. Yeah, just like what's real you work for in your dollars and cents, and in your shirt, and in your shoes, and in your car, and in your home, and your connection to the Eibishter. What you work for is real, and what you don't work for is called Nahama de Kisufa, bread of shame, or in the words of the Eishes Chaya, Lechem Atzlus, lazy bread. Lechem Atzlus lo yisecha. The Eishes Chaya does not eat Lechem Atzlus. You understand? Lechem Atzlus means a handout, a piece of bread that I didn't earn myself. It's a title. Lechem Atzlus means lazy bread. It's the Hebrew for the Aramaic expression, which is found in the Zayah that Rebbe always quoted, Nahama de Kisufa, bread of shame. So this is the other side. Chushim are very powerful, and they're another pathway to the neshama. If you have a sensitivity, you could see the Eibishter wherever you look, because you see beauty. An artist looks at the world through different eyes, because he's a Baal Chush, and I'm going to explain that in a few minutes. B'li neder. So he sees the Eibishter every place, and the impact is incredible. But how does it change him practically? And the answer is that unless he engages his mind and his heart, or to say it in other words, unless he admits that he has a Yetzer Hara that is the enemy and the challenge to what he sees means, and he engages with the Yetzer Hara, so he loves the Eibishter and he does nothing about it. In other words, he doesn't have he has a gewaldige capacity to love the Eibishter, to feel the Eibishter, to experience the Eibishter, but the Inyan of Sur Meirah, doing what says in Shulchan Aruch and not doing Averis, he doesn't have that chush because he doesn't understand that he needs to work. And the chushim are not work. The chushim are instantaneous and spontaneous because they come from the nefesh to the world and from the world to the nefesh. And the same is true when you hear. Right? What do you hear when you walk in the street? You hear sirens, you hear cars, you hear noise, yeah? Can you hear beauty? Can you hear the Eibishter? Some people do. It's called crickets. Crickets. Crickets is the Eibishter. You have to live in a farm to hear crickets, or whatever the case is, yeah? What do they call those cicadas? Cicadas, they're an insect that comes out from under the ground once in 15 years. And there's a whistle, a hum, that lasts like for 2 days, non-stop. They sing and then they're gone. In 15 years, they've invited the singing. It's an interesting, it's the Eibishter's world. Marav Masech Hashem, Agol Masech Hashem. So to most people, it's an annoyance. They're being kept up all night. But to some people, it's music. And to people for whom it's music, if they have a sensitive soul, they hear the Eibishter, the composer, the conductor, the one who wrote this. So, yeah. And the same is true with smell. The Eibishter made a world with all kinds of olfactory variety, and if you have an ability to smell things with a sensitivity, so you smell goodness, not only stink. You know, I saw an article recently which is very telling. When you talk about the five senses, yeah, the highest of the five senses is seeing. The lowest of the five senses is touching. Wegen dem denkt man sich nicht. Yeah. What about the other three? Hearing and smelling and tasting. So it becomes a little bit more complicated. How do you classify them? If you have to put them on a line, which the artists don't like lines. Artists like curves and twirls and circles and shapes that are not so easily put into a geometric square or space. But how do you position them? So that when you learn about chushim, in some place they say reach, k'teres is connected to reach. And it says in some places that k'teres, reach reaches mamkish yechidah shebenefesh. But people's sense of smell is very dulled. So I saw an article that primitive people who live in the forest and close to the nature, have incredibly superior sense of smell. You know, pygmies, you have these ancient tribes that are still living, they lived 5,000 years ago. Hunter-gatherers and people live in the African jungles and the Asian jungles and in South America and the Amazon. They have much better developed sense of smell because they use smell almost like animals do. They smell their environment. Our sense of smell is only a nuisance if the schmeckt nicht gut, you understand? But even human beings, the greatest gift God gave us is eyes. And we have binocular eyes. We have two eyes that are facing frontwards. So we can measure distances. We don't have eyes over here like some animals over here. So we could see with two eyes. So because we have two eyes, we're seeing it from 2 points of view. So we create a focus. A human being is better than most animals at knowing how far something is away. When you look at a ship, and it seems very small, is it a small ship that's close or a ship that's far away that seems small because it's far? How do you know? If you have only one eye, it's impossible to know. You have two eyes, they're this close together, but nevertheless they're a little bit apart. The brain can tell you by using both eyes, if they both work, not only what it is, but how far away it is, and therefore how big it is. These are all gifts that Eibishter gave us. So human beings have eyes. We use our eyes more than any other sense. The lowliest, the simplest of creatures, some of them only have touch. Some of them can't even smell. They can't have eyes at all. Insects. A lot of them don't have any eyes. They can just touch. And there's five senses. And like I said, for sure the highest of the senses is seeing. The lowest of sensing is touch. The three in the middle, how do you figure smell and taste? And sound, I believe sound is the second, but I never saw the Chassidus Befedish, so I don't want to venture a guess. Your guess is as good as mine. Why should I make the mistake? You make the mistake and I'll criticize you. Instead of me making the mistake and you criticizing me. But the Eibush gave us chushim. And that's what the chushim are. Again, the upside of the chushim are that the impact is immediate, and the downside of the chushim is that it doesn't necessarily warrant a change. It goes straight into the nefesh, has an incredible impact, and what happens next? What's supposed to happen is that your life is supposed to reflect what you saw and heard and smelled and tasted and touched, taught you. But because there's no process of gathering the information, it doesn't warrant a process of internalizing the information. So this is the great Maila of Chush, and this is the great Chsaron of Chush. Right? We call this art. Art. Artists are intelligent or unintelligent? Huh? Artists are smart or not smart?
This way,
The answer to that question is, smart people are artistic. It's a foolish question. It's apples and oranges. It's not, this is here and this is here. It's this is here and this is here. They're not in the same column, B'chlal. It's not in the same world. You can have a person who has an incredible chush in art and he doesn't have a very great intelligence. There's a person with great intelligence and he can't see and he can't hear. He's dumb. A very unusual person is a Muslim where he's intelligent and he can experience things with depth. And he also has the chushim. It's a whole different part of the nefesh. Again, they call it the right side of the brain, the left side of the brain. And of course, this is what you have a Rebbe for, right? It says in Chumash Rashi, in Pashas Pinchas, where Moshe Rabbeinu told by the Eibishter that he's not crossing over the Yarden. So the Eibishter, so Moshe Rabbeinu says to Eibishter, Vayidaber Moshe El Hashem Leimed. Moshe Rabbeinu tells the Eibishter Leimed, which means Leimed, answer me. Usually it's Vayemer Hashem El Moshe Leimed. Here it's Vayemer Moshe El Hashem Leimed. Yifked Elikim. Elakei Aruchas L'chol Gosar Ishal Ha'ed. Asher Yitziyim, Asher Yaviyim, Asher Yitzil Lefneim, Asher Yavir Lefneim. He asks the Eibishter that the Eibishter should appoint a successor. The Eibishter doesn't take Yeshua. So Rashi says, the first thing Rashi says is obviously, this is the greatness of the Jewish leaders. That the Eibishter tells him that he's passing away from the world. So instead of concerning himself with his own personal affairs, the first thing he does is Min Ha'ar El Ha'or. All he thinks about is the people. He says to the Eibishter, I need a successor. Someone's looking after my flock. But the second thing that Rashi says is that when he asks the Eibishter for the successor, the famous words are Ish sheyochel lahalech neged ruchei shel kol echad v'echad. I need you to appoint a successor who can speak the language of every person. And not everybody speaks the same language. No, it's not only a question, one person is smarter, so they understand things more quickly. Another person is less smart, so they understand things less quickly. Some people don't need to understand, they need to see. Or they need to hear. Or they need to smell. And you have to learn the language of Kol Echad V'Echad. So Moshe Rabbeinu says to Meibishtin, I need you to appoint a successor that can speak. A guy I know, a man I know, who told me personally that he was once by the Rebbe of Yechidus, goes back a very, very long time. And he was talking to the Rebbe about an Inyan. And he was asking and the Rebbe was answering. So the Rebbe answered him. And after the Rebbe finished answering, the Rebbe said as follows. Und in deine Werte, and in your words, and the Rebbe repeated the whole thing again. The Rebbe told him an answer to a question. It was not a question about philosophy. It was a question about life. It was a real question, avoid the question. So the Rebbe gave him an answer, and then the Rebbe said to him, and in your words, this is not normal. To have an ability to listen to somebody else and hear how they think and give it back to them in their form is a Rebbe. And some people need pictures, and some people need sound, and some people need smell, and some people need taste. And you have to have the chush, you have to have the feel, you have to have the sensitivity, you have to have the ruchnis, you have to have the adinus to sense, when you meet a human being, what language is his or hers. So you can speak to each one his own language or her own language. It's called chush. Chush is the sensitivity, the senses. Now I want to translate the word, right? Chush means the senses. Now I don't know what the word means. It's either Greek or Latin. It's an old, senses have been around a long time, yeah? Chush means the senses. Senses means hearing, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. But in Hebrew, the word chush doesn't mean the technical aspect of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. Animals can also see. Animals can also hear. Animals can also smell. And they use those senses to survive, to navigate the world, to eat and not be eaten, to procreate, to have territory, and so on and so forth. No, but when an animal looks at something beautiful in the Eibishter's world, what does he see? Food or not food? Can I eat it or can I not eat it? If I can't eat it, you're going to invite. If I can't eat it, let me figure out how I'm going to catch it. In other words, he doesn't see. He sees. But his eyes serve a very technical purpose. They help him survive. A human being sees and lives. He experiences life. It's called a chush. When I was a child, I heard from one of my elder nebuchim the mashal of the giraffe and the goat. I repeat this many times. What's this mashal of the giraffe and the goat? Where the goat cannot see the sky. He's always looking down. And the giraffe sees the sky. I say, get the mashal, don't get nervous, it's only a mashal. And the giraffe is trying to explain to the goat how beautiful the world is. And the goat says, I can't lift my head, I'm going to break my neck. But you don't understand, you're missing out. All you see is grass, all you smell is hay. You don't know what you're missing out. Anyway, the goat is mesa nefesh, breaks its neck, raises up its head, and says to the giraffe, so what am I looking at? Don't you see? Look at the clouds, and the sky, and the mountain, and the trees, and the snow, and the river, or the little creek that's bringing the water from the mountains into the valley, and the grasses on the plains, and the goat says, but I can't eat it. If I can't eat it, what use do I have for it? In other words, it's not the pshat he doesn't see. He doesn't see what he sees. So in Chassidus, the translation of the word chush is a feel, a psychological feel, a spirit. Chush doesn't mean to see. It means to see and experience. And the Frierdiker Rebbe has letters. The Frierdiker Rebbe has letters where he explains chush. We have it in my modern also. And again, I'm reminding you, this is a topic in Chassidus which the earlier Rabbi, from what I understand, you don't have so much. The Frierdiker Rebbe develops it. The background to this is as follows. The Frierdiker Rebbe had a younger daughter whose name was Shendel. The Rebbe wrote the Matzeva of the Rebbitzin. Our Rebbe personally wrote the Nusach of the Matzeva of the Frierdiker Rebbe of the Rebbitzin. And on the bottom he wrote Le'ilu Nishmas Achesa Parabonis Hatzitkonis Moras Shendel. I don't know if he wrote his father's name, Hayad. She was the Frierdiker Rebbe's youngest daughter. She married a cousin. She married the Frierdiker Rebbe's first cousin, the Rebbe Rash's grandson. His name was Menachem Mendel HaKoyen Horenstein. The Frierdiker Rebbe had an uncle. The Rebbe Rash had a brother-in-law. His name was Moshe Horenstein, Moshe HaKoyen Horenstein. And I think they were the Unterfrieder by the Rebbe's Chasene. The Rebbe did his parents went up by the wedding. So the Frierdiker Rebbe was one set of Unterfrieder. Who was the other set of Unterfrieder? I think it was Moshe HaKoyen Horenstein. His Rebbetzin, whose name was Chaya Mushka, was a daughter of the Rebbe Marash. She was killed in Treblinka. The closest to the Rebbe's Mishpacha that was killed in Treblinka, the Rebbe Marash lost a daughter in Treblinka, and the Frierdiker Rebbe lost a daughter in Treblinka. They were together. They were Shvigerin and Schnur. The Rebbe's in Shendel, the Frierdiker Rebbe's youngest daughter, married the son of the Frierdiker Rebbe's aunt. You understand? So when they were killed, Horenstein, not Orenstein, Horenstein. The family that you saw Horenstein, basically, it's a different mishpacha, Horenstein. They're a Choshev mishpacha. They were Horensteins in New York. I said in America, emphasis in Israel. Ich weiß nicht. They were killed in 1941, Tafshin Beis, the beginning of the war. From the perspective of Poland, actually Poland was not so beginning. And the Rebbe got word, after the war, they were trying to find him. And there was a man whose name is written in the Igris Kedesh, who was in Treblinka. He was together with Mendel Horenstein. He was together with the son-in-law. And one day, Mendel Horenstein comes to the barracks at the end of the day, and he says, my mother didn't come back to the barracks. Men and women were separate. But he was Masiach Lefituma. He told this man that he somehow knew that his mother didn't come back to the barracks. If his mother didn't come back to the barracks, that means he went to Rachmanos onto the gas chambers. I think it was like in Elul, Tafshin Aleph, 1941, Elul. Then, the second day, Rosh Hashanah, Mendel Horenstein says to the same man, my wife didn't come back to the barracks. Shendel. And the Rebbe say Kaddish for her every day, second Rosh Hashanah. And then on Chof Hei Cheshvan, Mendel Horenstein himself didn't come back to the barracks. And this Yid kept these dates out. The Rebbe trusted him. I mean, But they did not ever disclose this because they didn't want the Frierdiker Rebbe to know. I mean, the Frierdiker Rebbe knew. But there's knowing and knowing. You understand? The Frierdiker Rebbe read a description of how they killed Chassidim in Riga, and he had a stroke. Kipshute, he had a stroke. In the end of 1945, the Frierdiker Rebbe had a stroke because he read a letter describing what they did to each of the Maslim. So they started to censor his mail, which they never did before. They started to censor the Rebbe's mail. The Rebbe didn't get all the mail. They would censor what came to the Rebbe. The Rebbe, our Rebbe, censored the mail. Nicht Abive. So they never officially came out with a Yotzei. Tovshin Yud Aleph, 1950, was the year after the Frierdiker Rebbe was installed. So the Rebbe gave out a Kuntres Chof Hei Cheshvan Tovshin Yud Aleph. That's what it's called, Kuntres Chof Hei Cheshvan. And of course, later on in Lubavitch, Chof Hei Cheshvan became a Yom Besura. The second Idan Notzach was Chof Hei Cheshvan. But at that time, it was a date that no one ever heard of. And on the inside of the Kuntres is a letter from the Rebbe, where the Rebbe writes that there's a man whose name is Kach V'Kach, and he was in Treblinka, and he said the story that I just told you, that on this and this date, Mendel Harnstein came back to the barrack, and he says, my mother didn't come back to the barrack. And then a month later, he says to him, my wife didn't come back to the barrack. And about a month and a half later, he himself didn't come back to the barrack. And then the Rebbe writes, for obvious reasons, we were not mefasim this until now. It doesn't say, but it was obvious. So the Rebbe gave a kuntres. It was a part of the Hemshech Tzadikdala that came out that winter, which was dedicated to his sister-in-law, the Rebbe's younger sister. The Rebbe and her sister were very, very close. His brother-in-law and the aunt, the mother-in-law, who was a daughter of the Rebbe Marash, Chaya Mushkin. So on the back of the kuntres, there's two letters. Very special letters. One letter is in Yiddish, from the Frierdiker Rebbe to Shendel, to his daughter. And the other letter is in Hebrew. It's a longer letter. It's from the Frierdiker Rebbe to Mendel Harnstein, to Mendel HaKoyen, Menachem Mendel HaKoyen Harnstein. This is a husband and a wife. This is Frierdiker Rebbe's daughter and Frierdiker Rebbe's son-in-law. Both letters have the same tema, the same theme, the same spirit. Apparently, they were big balichush. I mean, I heard from people that the Rebbe in Shadel had an IQ of a Rebbe. She was genius. She was brilliant. She was smart like the Rebbe was. But apparently, they were also very, very, very artistic. We use the word artistic, but art is only one of the five senses. You know, music is also artistic. And there's different chushim. There's five chushim. You know, music is one chush. Art is another chush. I mean, the ability to understand smell is a third chush. And the same is true with taste, and the same is true with touch. There are five different chushim. And the Rebbe calls them gewaltige balichushim. So in this first letter, which is written to his daughter, he writes, it's written in real Yiddish. It's not a common Yiddish. It's Yiddish without Hebrew. It's Yiddish. That the Tate, the Rebbe Rashab, had gesagt of dir as Shendel hat. Oh, I don't remember the words. Edel chushim, I think. But Shendel, the Rebbe's youngest daughter, has very fine chushim, senses. And the Frierdiker Rebbe writes, das hat gesagt, a edele person. You have to see the Yiddish. It's special. This wasn't just said by anybody, it was said by my father, the Rebbe Rashab. And the whole letter is describing how the Rebbe Rashab had said about her as a girl, that she's very sensitive. She feels with her eyes, with, like an artist type. And in the hemshech of that letter, if I'm not mistaken, if ich mach atos, today you can't make a mistake because it's all in print. You say something which is a Teresh Shabbat Peh. He writes about his visit to Eretz Yisrael, which happened years before, or maybe not so many years before. The Frierdiker Rebbe says, my life was such a yogenish. My whole life was daigis. I came from Russia, and it was so hard. And leaving Russia didn't make life easier because I didn't stop worrying about what I left behind. And he traveled around, and he says, I came to Eretz Yisrael, and there was a fabrengen, a gathering of people, a couple hours. Who sat at this fabrengen? Ältere Chassidim. And the Frierdiker Rebbe says, ich bin gesessen und geguckt auf sie, und sie sind gesessen und geguckt auf mir. I sat and looked at them, and they sat and looked at me. Und jeder einer hat gewollt sehen in mir sein Rebbe. Each one of them wanted to see in me their Rebbe. There were people who looked at me and wanted to see the Tzemach Tzedek. There were people who looked at me and wanted to see the Zayde, the Rebbe Marash. There were people who looked at me and gewollt sehen dem Taten, my father. And the others gewollt sehen the Vetter, my uncles. This says the Tzemach Tzedek's other sons, the Rebbe Marash's brothers. And he says, for those few hours, they were all going into their nostalgia. So I went into my nostalgia. And for a few hours, my digest were gone. I was not in the world of my obligations and my responsibilities. I was raised up. I'm almost certain that this is the letter they wrote to his daughter. But the premise was, you look at another person and the power of what you see. In other words, it brings you back to a whole other place. It's not a meditation. You know, it's not a meditation. You sit for 2 hours, you look at a person and it transports you. The idea of chush. Yeah. This is a letter which he wrote to his daughter. I'm going to go home and check. And if I'm making a mistake, I'll have to fix it. But what I'm just telling you is in this letter. The second letter, which is much longer, is written in Hebrew. It's a more scholarly letter. And it's written to the angel, to the son-in-law. And he writes the same thing, that you're a balchush. They were intelligent people. These were shneifsons. You understand? Their IQ started 30 points above everybody else's. You're not talking about the simple people, pashut intellectual. But they were also balichush, sensitive people. So there's a whole letter which writes of Nachman Lakoyin, which is a very interesting letter. Because in that letter, first of all, he speaks how chush, I've told this to you a number of times, how chush jumps. Chush jumps. Chush jumps. In other words, if you're a bal chush, if you're an artist or you're a musician, it doesn't mean your children will be, but your great-grandson will be. It skips generations. It's not like koiches. If you're smart, your children will be smart. If you're passionate, your children will be passionate. Chush is very hard to predict. It doesn't get lost, but it doesn't necessarily show up in successive generations. And he gives two examples. The first example is that the Baditchev Erov was a Meidendike Balchush in Negina. The holy Baditchev Erov had an incredible chush feel for music. He says his children didn't have it. He says, Der Wunderkind, this is going back, the letter was written 80 years ago. The wonder child, Yehuda Menuchin, is a direct descendant of the Baditchev Erov, and he inherited the chush of music from him. Isn't that interesting? Yehuda Menuchin. And then he continues. The Tzemach Tzedek had a chush in Handosa. Handosa means engineering, Handosa means geometry, Handosa means abstract math. And today there was a great grandson of the Tzemach Tzedek who also has a chush in Handosa. But he's unnamed, you understand? This is the Rebbe. Mendel HaKoyin hat lein verstanden. The Rebbe doesn't write, das ist dein Schwager, Harav. He just says, today, this is one of the aspects of the letter. One of the other interesting aspects, which is most interesting, is he tells a long story how the Rebbe Rashab and the Frierdiker Rebbe went to see paintings by an artist whose name was Raphael, a famous artist. 3 pictures. One is a war scene, the other is a judgment, and the third is a wheat field. He describes each one in detail, how dynamic it is and how alive it is. And of course, the end of that story was that there's a wheat field, and in the foreground there's a stalk of wheat, and a bird is sitting on the stalk. And as the Rebbe Rashab and the Frierdiker are observing this painting, there's a tour of intelligent dimension. People who think they're very important. And they're marveling at the realism of this art. And a farmer walks by and says, And they turn around and they say to this farmer, Mi atom, how do you dare even think of Machshavah Zara about Raphael? He says, I grew up on a farm. When a bird perches on a stalk of wheat, it bends. And it was standing straight. And nobody noticed it. And the Rebbe makes this a ganze Indian. It's a beautiful letter. I'm giving you a sense of the letter. The letter's probably translated in English. It's a long letter. But this is all the part, the mushy feeling stuff, yeah? What you want to hear, yeah? But there's also scholarship in the letter. And in the letter, the Rebbe says there's 2 different things that people confuse. One is called a chush, and the other is called a kishon. Chush means a sense, a feel. Not a feel with your fingers necessarily, not a feel with your heart, a feel of the neshama. And kishon means a talent. And a real artist has to combine a chush and a kishon. Because if you have a chush, you will love music, but you may not be able to sing it. If you have a kisharon, you can sing very beautifully, but your music doesn't have any life because you don't feel what you're singing. And the same is true with each of the 5 chushim. There's a person who can draw, and there's a person who appreciates beauty. Only if you combine the appreciation for beauty and the talent to be able to record it precisely, you're an artist. If you're a bal chush without a bal kishnin, or a bal kishnin without a bal chush, you're a half. And of course, what the Rebbe is trying to say is that a chush is much more important than a kisharon. A kisharon can make a living. A person who's artistic, I had yesterday in my home, a woman who she does caricatures, she does, with a pencil art. I forgot the word that they use for it. Not calligraphy. No, art.
She looks at somebody and she draws not like.
So what's the? No. She's. What is it called? That's the tools that you're using. It's a type. People do caricature. There's a word for it. Okay. Nobody here knows what the word is.
He's a caricaturist.
There's another word. It's a kisharon. And you can make a good living doing this. Yeah? You scribble pictures. Some people do it with their eyes closed. Yeah. But for you to make a picture that tells a story, you have to first feel the story you want to tell. Then you have to create the image that you want to juxtapose that feel against. And then you have to write it. And when you write it, the person's not only seeing the perfect face or the perfect nose or the perfect eyes, but they're hearing the story. Whether it's a story of happiness, or a story of sadness, or a story of love, or a story of anger, a story of desperation, a story of pleading. He describes a war scene. How intense it is. How every face is saying something different on the battlefield. The one who's killing and the one who's being killed. And then in the courtroom, he describes a little boy pleading. Raphael was apparently a real artist. So you have the judges, and they're all sitting, and you see every face says something else. And the little boy is pleading for his father's life, and you see the condemned. And the Frierdiker Rebbe talks you through all of these details. The Baal Chush is a Ruchni is the Ketfin. The Baal Kishlein is the technical. Chazonim zayin aronim. A chazan can sing beautifully. He has a great voice, and he can hold his melody. But if he doesn't have a chush, it's dead. Then you have people who are gewaltige Baal Chush, they can't sing. They can't. When I was a little child, I died in the name of Huvim. I'm way over time. I'm like out of control over here. I'm enjoying myself, if you haven't noticed. I died in the name of Huvim. The Rebbe wanted us to daven in the neighborhoods. We didn't daven in 770, not because we wanted to walk, but because the Rebbe wanted us to daven in the shuls. Then Rebbe Mahuvim had a whole table, you must say 15 men, who all were in Ashur, all had numbers, Ungarish. It took me a long time to understand what I was seeing. And then I remember one by one, the seats emptied. The this one moved, that one moved. And they always had their regular places. And you didn't take their seats. This was the sacred table. This was Rai Mahiv. And they were a cast of characters. They were nervous and they were angry and they shouted at each other. They fought like cats and dogs. They went to the Holocaust as children and as teenagers. They didn't have normal lives. So the fact that they got married and had families was a nes she'en kamayu. But they were not exactly normal people. And there was a guy, I forgot his name. He sat at the head of the table. He never shouted. And when it would get quiet at the Kiddush, Flatonim Zingen, the guy barely had a voice. And my father, was a Chassidish Yid. My father, in fact, davening. As a child, my childhood memories are the lights and the Mahuvim are out. There's nobody in the room. My father was with a towel over his head, and we're playing Siddur or Chumash, whatever we played. But when this guy would sing, my father would stop and listen. The guy, he had no voice. Of singing the Ginim, and everybody would get quiet, and the Ungarish would forget about all their stupid petty fights, and he would sing. He would sing until he became aware that people are listening to him sing, and then he would stop. And I remember in Shul there was the whole fight as against a moment. He would never go to the Yom. He didn't go to the Yom. But he had a chush. I don't remember his name. I don't remember what he sang. If I'll remember, I'll ask my father. But it's a childhood experience. I was too young to appreciate what my father appreciated. My father didn't stop the daven because he was singing chazonis. He had a chush. He spoke the language of the old country in a way that it came across. Like no kishon. I mean, he sang correctly. He was not off tune. He had trap. He had no voice. He couldn't sing. But he sang. So in Chassidus and in Chassidischkeit, the chush is more important than the kisharon. In terms of talent, you can make straight lines or crooked lines, or these kinds of lines, or that kind of lines. You can see proportions and symmetry. It's very important in art. But the real chush of an artist, and you look at the picture and he's telling you a story. And through this still image comes through life. That each person who sees it hears what the artist is saying, but they hear what the artist is saying in their own nusach. So the same painting says 1,000 people to 1,000 different people. And the same is true in music. Real musicians don't just write pieces that go according to the halachas of music. It speaks the shoman. And the same is true in smell, in a different way, obviously. The same is true in taste. Taste, it's a ganze chochmah. And the same is true in mishush, in touch. There is such a thing as texture, and feel, and so on and so on. I told you stories from the Frierdiker Rebbe. How bad could it possibly be?